It began as a faint anomaly on the outer reaches of the Empire's surveillance grid, just a flicker, the kind of interference normally ignored. But the signals didn't fade. They grew stronger, steady, and eerily precise. Operators at the listening post stared in disbelief as energy readings spiked, the numbers ticking higher than any known civilian or military fleet. Sensors captured something vast, a formation too large to be a rogue ship or a stray fleet. It was an armada, methodically making its way through the fringe systems. Reports began flooding in from outposts stationed at the edge of Empire-controlled space. Unidentified ships, black as the void, moving in perfect formation, steadily advancing toward the heart of the Empire's territory. Officers submitted their observations, each message sounding more desperate than the last. But the upper echelons of the Empire dismissed them as overblown rumors or technical glitches. After all, who could possibly field a fleet of this magnitude without their knowing? But the transmissions didn't stop. Remote surveillance drones, deployed to confirm the sightings, returned recordings that left even the most hardened commanders silent. Towering ships, dark and unyielding, covered in unknown markings, each one larger than the last, extended across the visual feed. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching as far as the sensors could reach, their energy signatures pulsating like the heartbeat of something immense and relentless. The humans had arrived, and they were making no effort to hide it. By now, lower-ranking officers were scrambling to get the attention of anyone in power, filing urgent reports that only grew more frantic with each passing hour. But their superiors ignored the warnings, unable to accept the reality forming before them. Humanity had always been dismissed as a minor species, resourceful, yes, and irritatingly defiant, but ultimately irrelevant. They were known for resilience and their stubborn nature, yet no one took them seriously as a military force. A few skirmishes in the past had seen human ships holding their own, but nothing on this scale, nothing that would suggest they could field a fleet of this magnitude. The Council's confidence was rooted in long-standing superiority, a belief that the Empire's forces were unmatchable, that any attempt by humans to challenge them would be laughable at best. Empire leaders cited previous clashes where humans had relied on ingenuity, on clever tactics rather than sheer strength. They were scrappy, a nuisance, but not a genuine threat. The Empire had encountered species far more dangerous than humans, and none had dared mount an offensive of this scale. But the signals persisted, and the fleet grew closer with every passing day. At last, an emergency council session was called to discuss the reports of an incoming human fleet, though most in attendance still dismissed it as an exaggerated misreading of data. They argued that humans couldn't possibly field such a force, that this was either a mistake or an elaborate ruse. Pride, deeply ingrained in the council members, blinded them to the urgency of the situation, to the overwhelming evidence mounting in front of them. Despite the warnings, the Council saw fit to send only a minor envoy to confirm what they deemed a phantom fleet. The Envoy's last transmission was a single image, a view from the bridge of their ship, capturing the full extent of the human armada. Row after row of dark ships filled the viewport, extending beyond the horizon, each vessel an intimidating silhouette against the void. There were no lights, no signals, just the oppressive silence of ships designed for one purpose. The transmission cut abruptly, and no further communications were received. Panic spread among the Empire's officers. Junior commanders, who had seen the footage, began questioning whether their defenses were adequate, but their superiors continued to reassure them. Some among the Council clung to the notion that humans were bluffing, that they wouldn't dare engage in an outright attack. They argued that even if the fleet were real, it would crumble before the Empire's vastly superior technology. After all, the humans were newcomers, a species that had barely scratched the surface of advanced warfare. But those closest to the front lines knew better. Reports trickled in from scouts who had observed the human fleet firsthand. Each message conveyed the same stark reality. These weren't hastily assembled ships. They were war machines, crafted with brutal efficiency. Every vessel was armed, ready, and positioned with exact precision. The humans weren't coming to negotiate, nor were they here to intimidate. Their intentions were clear: written in the unbroken formation of ships that advanced with unwavering purpose. By now, the lower ranks of the Empire's military were bracing for the inevitable. They began preparing for conflict, taking matters into their own hands as higher-ranking officials continued to scoff at the idea of humans mounting a real threat. Whispers circulated among the troops, rumors of humanity's resilience, their reputation as a species that thrived under pressure. Tales spread of human ingenuity, their ability to adapt, and their refusal to submit. For the first time, these traits were viewed with fear rather than condescension. Then came the final report, one that left no room for doubt. A high-ranking scout, a decorated officer known for his level-headedness, sent a transmission back to the council, his voice tense but controlled. He described the fleet's formation, noting the discipline and cohesion that rivaled even the Empire's finest. "This is no rogue faction," he warned. "This is a unified force, and they are advancing with absolute intent. If we do not respond, they will reach our inner systems within days." But by the time the Council fully grasped the situation, it was too late. The fleet had breached the Empire's borders, advancing steadily with the precision of a blade cutting through air. The Council scrambled, issuing orders for a defensive line, hastily mobilizing fleets to intercept. But every preparation felt inadequate, every defense insufficient in the face of what was coming. As humanity's fleet continued its silent march forward, a chilling realization settled over those watching. This was a force that defied every expectation, a power that the Empire had never anticipated. The Council had underestimated humanity, dismissed them as insignificant, and now, as the fleet loomed closer, they were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. The Empire's disbelief gave way to fear, their confidence eroding under the weight of the human fleet's inexorable advance. They had expected a species still learning the ways of war, a civilization that could be cowed or controlled. What they faced instead was a force prepared for annihilation, a fleet that marched without pause or mercy, answering to nothing but the will of humanity itself. And for the first time in generations, the Empire felt the grip of true terror. The council chamber echoed with murmurs and scoffs as the emergency meeting commenced, voices layered with disbelief and veiled scorn. High-ranking officials and councilors argued, dismissing the recent reports of humanity's approaching fleet. To them, it was preposterous. Humanity was a minor power, a scrappy species with more pride than sense. The very idea that they could field an armada capable of breaching Empire space was laughable to those who had long held their seats in authority. One counselor, seated near the head of the chamber, gestured dismissively, his voice thick with arrogance. Humans? Really? They've been nothing but an irritation, a species barely advanced enough to leave their own star system a century ago. I cannot believe we are even discussing them as a legitimate threat. Another council member, one known for his decisive, almost cutthroat approach, leaned forward. What we're seeing is likely a small fleet, dressed up to look intimidating. A bluff. Nothing more. We've encountered far superior forces, true warriors, and we've brought each one to heel. Why should humans be any different? But not all were so quick to dismiss the reports. At the edges of the council, a few officials sat silent, their expressions grim. They had heard the desperate voices of frontline commanders and officers, seen the transmissions showing ships stretching across entire sectors, advancing in perfect, unyielding formation. These images haunted them, planting seeds of doubt and fear, a silent acknowledgement that perhaps they had underestimated humanity's capacity. One of the military advisors, a seasoned veteran of many campaigns, cleared his throat, earning a few impatient glances from the council. I've reviewed the latest reports, and they're consistent. Each source, each scout, describes the same thing, a coordinated fleet with weaponry and energy readings beyond what we've known humans to possess. This isn't an act of bravado. It's precise, it's calculated, and it's advancing with intent. If we dismiss this as a bluff, we may not survive the mistake. The counselor from before snorted, waving a hand dismissively. Humans? Calculated? They're known for chaos, not strategy. They rely on luck and audacity, nothing that could rival the discipline of our forces. And yet you suggest they've suddenly become a disciplined military power? He shook his head. Impossible. A quiet murmur spread through the chamber, a wave of disdain mixed with flickers of uncertainty. Yet the reports remained irrefutable. Every new transmission indicated that this was no bluff. Humanity wasn't coming with a handful of ships. They were bringing a fleet designed for one purpose. Yet the Council, entrenched in centuries of unchallenged dominance, couldn't bring themselves to believe that such a force could come from a species so new to the stars. Some, however, had begun to reconsider, spurred by memories of the past. Humanity had proven their resilience before. Every time the Council tried to extend its influence over them, they resisted, stubborn and defiant. Where other species folded or negotiated, humanity had never compromised. They had endured, found ways to push back, and each time, they seemed to grow stronger. But to the Council, that had always been a nuisance, an irritation at best. It had never been seen as a threat. Yet here they were, standing on the verge of a confrontation they'd never anticipated. One of the younger counselors, who had studied humanity closely, dared to speak up, voice shaking with a blend of awe and fear. What if we've misunderstood their resilience? Humanity has always thrived under pressure, found ways to adapt that we haven't predicted. And now, if they've managed to harness that adaptability into disciplined power, if this fleet is what it appears to be, they may have achieved what no other species has, a way to truly challenge us. The silence that followed was telling. There were no quick dismissals this time, no scoffing. For a brief, uncomfortable moment, the Council considered that they might be facing a force unlike anything they had encountered. A growing sense of unease settled over them, a gnawing suspicion that humanity was not only coming, but coming to destroy. Yet pride ran deep within the Council, and many were too rooted in their own authority to accept the idea. A senior Council member, cold and calculated, stood up, breaking the silence with a sharp tone. Even if this fleet exists, even if they have somehow managed to cobble together a force of this scale, it does not change our response. We will meet them with our own fleets, show them that this arrogance has a price. We have crushed stronger adversaries and brought entire civilizations to their knees. Humanity will be no different. His words elicited murmurs of approval, rekindling the confidence that had wavered moments before. The Council had long controlled the galaxy through an iron grip, unyielding and absolute. They were accustomed to bending other species to their will, showing strength to maintain order. Yet behind this renewed confidence, small flickers of doubt lingered, a creeping uncertainty they could not banish. Some Council members who had seen the transmission themselves felt a chill that wouldn't dissipate. They knew that this fleet wasn't just some cobbled-together formation. It was an organized, relentless force, each ship positioned with purpose, every vessel moving with a single intent. Humanity wasn't coming to negotiate, to threaten, or to make demands. They were advancing like a hammer poised to strike. And the Council, blinded by their own arrogance, seemed unprepared to recognize the threat staring them down. The debate continued, with some urging caution, suggesting a reconnaissance mission to assess humanity's capabilities, while others insisted on mobilizing the full might of the Empire to crush this insurrection before it reached the core systems. But amid the bickering and posturing, an undeniable truth settled in the minds of a select few. Humanity was no longer the species they had dismissed. They had evolved, risen to a level that defied the Council's expectations, and they were coming with an iron resolve. As the meeting drew to a close, the Council issued a final order to mobilize the fleet, to intercept humanity's armada and show them the true might of the Empire. Yet, for all their bravado, there was an underlying tension that couldn't be dismissed. For the first time, the Empire's leaders found themselves doubting their own strength, their assuredness wavering as they prepared to face a species they had once considered insignificant. The Council chamber emptied, filled with a quiet unease that contrasted with the loud, dismissive rhetoric they had espoused. Humanity's fleet was no longer just a rumor, no longer an exaggeration. It was real, advancing, and prepared. And as the Council left, a single thought lingered in the minds of those few who had truly understood the implications of the reports. This wasn't a challenge, but a reckoning. The human fleet appeared on every scanner across the Empire's borders, its sheer scale and precision an undeniable reality now. Command stations along the outer reaches of Empire space transmitted frantic messages, and in each, the tone was the same, a mixture of awe and dread, voices trembling as they described the dark wall of ships moving steadily toward the Empire's heart. The ships stretched on, a disciplined formation extending into the darkness, more ships than any station had ever seen gathered in one place. First visuals came from the Empire's scout ships, small vessels positioned at the outer perimeter to assess the incoming threat. The footage they sent back chilled even the most hardened commanders. There was no scattered formation, no ragtag assembly of vessels. Humanity's fleet was organized with perfect symmetry, each line of ships precisely aligned, a seamless wall of black and gray cutting through space with cold, mechanical purpose. The silence from the fleet was oppressive, no signals, no demands, just the steady, unbroken advance of a force that had come with a single purpose. At first, the Empire's commanders tried to organize a response, relaying orders from high command with an urgency that betrayed their growing fear. Fleets were scrambled, mobilized to form a defensive line, hoping to contain the threat before it breached their inner systems. But the human fleet continued forward, unhindered, ignoring the scouts that peeled away in retreat, overwhelmed by the sheer size and speed of the approaching armada. Messages from the front lines grew increasingly desperate, voices breaking under the pressure as commanders described the relentless advance. "They just keep coming," one officer managed to transmit before his signal cut out. The human fleet didn't waver, each ship maintaining exact formation, their silent advance an unspoken declaration that no force, no display of power, would divert their path. When the Empire's first defensive line finally met humanity's fleet, the clash was brief and brutal. The Empire's ships, confident and battle-tested, moved to intercept with calculated precision, preparing to overwhelm the front lines of humanity's formation. But as soon as the first shots were fired, it became apparent that the humans hadn't just come with numbers. They had come with technology, weaponry, and a strategic discipline that mirrored, if not exceeded, the Empire's own. Human ships retaliated with a ferocity and accuracy that stunned the Empire's forces. Laser fire and energy blasts cut through the Empire's ships, one after another, each shot finding its mark with a precision that left no room for error. Empire commanders watched as ship after ship in their own fleet was vaporized, shields and defenses failing in the face of human firepower. It wasn't long before the Empire's lines began to falter, the supposedly impenetrable defenses folding under humanity's unyielding assault. Panic set in among the Empire's forces. Commanders shouted contradictory orders, desperate attempts to regroup and reform, but humanity's fleet continued advancing, methodical and unbothered. There was no hesitation, no need to adjust. They had come prepared, every movement executed with the same unerring purpose. Empire ships tried to fall back, to buy time, but the humans pressed forward relentlessly, capitalizing on every weakness exposed by the chaotic retreat. Frantic transmissions poured in from the second line of defense, desperate pleas for reinforcements and backup. But the messages were cut short, each ending abruptly as the human fleet swept through them, annihilating everything in its path. The Empire's most seasoned officers, those who had survived countless skirmishes, felt a new kind of terror, a fear born not from strength or brutality but from the absolute, inescapable realization that they were outmatched in every possible way. Even as reports of the fleet's advance reached the inner systems, the Empire's high command struggled to comprehend the scale of the destruction. They watched in disbelief as entire fleets were obliterated in minutes, their commanders' final transmissions punctuated by static, the distant rumble of explosions. The human fleet didn't pause to regroup or celebrate. They simply moved forward, as if the annihilation of an entire fleet was nothing more than a step in their calculated progression. In the midst of the Empire's unraveling defenses, one commander managed to transmit a final message back to high command. His voice was flat, almost numb, as he relayed the last sight he'd seen before his ship was overtaken. "It's like they know every move before we make it. They don't hesitate. They don't break formation. They don't even acknowledge our resistance. The Empire's finest ships, their most powerful weapons, all fell silent against the human fleet's relentless march. There was no panic, no visible celebration on the part of humanity, just an unbreakable, mechanized focus, as if they had prepared for this moment down to the smallest detail. Every Empire ship that tried to flee, every last-ditch defensive maneuver, was met with the same lethal precision. The humans had come prepared not just to fight, but to eradicate. The reality of their situation finally began to sink in across the Empire's systems. The humans weren't playing by the rules of interstellar war as the Empire understood them. They weren't attempting to negotiate, to claim territory, or to flex their power as a show of intimidation. They had come for one reason alone: to bring a definitive end to the Empire's reign. The Council, for all its arrogance and hubris, now faced a reckoning they had never imagined possible. The Empire's leaders watched the carnage unfold in helpless silence, their once unshakable confidence evaporating as their fleets disintegrated before their eyes. They had prided themselves on their order, their structure, their strength. Yet here they were, witnessing the obliteration of everything they had built, realizing too late that humanity's arrival wasn't a mistake, or a fluke. It was a calculated, unstoppable march toward annihilation, and the Empire had no way to stop it. As the human fleet continued its advance, the last remnants of the Empire's outer defenses fell, one by one, without a single moment of mercy. For the first time, the Empire's leaders understood the depth of humanity's resolve, a silent, unyielding determination that had brought them here, that had transformed them from a species dismissed as insignificant into a force that could rival the strongest civilization in the galaxy. They had underestimated humanity, dismissed them as a species limited by their past, their primitive technology, and their lack of galactic experience. But now, as their fleets vanished in a storm of fire and silence, the truth was undeniable. Humanity was a force they had never anticipated, a power they could no longer ignore. And as the last defensive lines crumbled, leaving the Empire's inner systems exposed, a single, horrifying realization settled across every council member and commander: humanity had come not just to challenge them, but to erase them from the stars. The Empire's core systems were a frenzy of activity as orders were screamed across comms, soldiers mobilized, and fleets hastily assembled. Every available vessel was scrambled to form a final line of defense, an impromptu blockade to shield the Empire's heart. Yet the frantic energy wasn't the calculated readiness of seasoned warriors. It was desperation, a last-ditch attempt to hold back the unrelenting advance of a force that had, so far, swept through every defense like a storm. In the command center of the Empire's inner systems, high-ranking officials and council members watched the monitors in grim silence, seeing the remnants of their once mighty fleets coalesce in a loose line, bracing for humanity's arrival. Officers barked orders, trying to rally the remaining forces, but they all knew what was coming. The reports had been chillingly consistent. Humanity's fleet was moving with surgical precision, each battle a brutal, one-sided clash that left no survivors, no remnants, only silence. The council members, their confidence shattered, exchanged uneasy glances as the first readings came through. Humanity's fleet was now fully visible on their screens, a dark mass approaching with all the quiet purpose of a death knell. These were not rogue ships or scattered factions. This was an organized, disciplined force. It moved as one, and its purpose was unmistakable. Finally, the two forces clashed. The Empire's fleet, assembled from every corner of their territory, surged forward, a chaotic collection of cruisers, carriers, and battleships armed with the Empire's most advanced weaponry. Yet as the first waves fired upon humanity's ships, their weaponry lit up the void with futile bursts, blasts absorbed by the human fleet's seamless shields. Humanity's ships responded immediately, unleashing a torrent of fire that sliced through the Empire's ships like a blade through water. Explosions rippled across the Empire's ranks, their formations splintering under the relentless assault. The transmissions from the Empire's fleet were filled with chaos, commands overlapped, panicked voices cried out for reinforcements that couldn't arrive in time, for strategies that no longer existed. Every defensive maneuver was met with the same devastating response. Human ships moved with lethal efficiency, each strike delivered with a precision that bordered on surgical, breaking through defenses in calculated bursts that shattered the Empire's cohesion. Panic escalated as the Empire's defensive line buckled, fragments of once mighty ships drifting into the dark, reduced to nothing more than silent wreckage. Commands turned into pleas as commanders, once steadfast, now scrambled to protect what little remained of their forces. In the face of humanity's advance, every defensive line felt like a paper wall, every counterattack an exercise in futility. One fleet commander's final transmission cut through the noise, his voice grim and resolute. "This is not war, this is extermination. They're not stopping, not hesitating. There's no diplomacy here, only an end." His words were barely out when static overtook the channel, his ship joining the countless others that vanished under the crushing force of humanity's fleet. Back in the command center, the council watched, horror etched onto every face. They had been warned, had seen the early signs of humanity's capacity for tenacity and resolve, but they had dismissed them as a nuisance, a minor irritation in the grand scheme of the Empire's dominance. But this was a force they couldn't rationalize, couldn't dismiss. They were witnessing a reckoning, an answer to every slight, every underestimation they had ever shown toward humanity. In a last desperate attempt, the Empire's High Command ordered the deployment of their ultimate weapons, experimental arms meant to deter only the most fearsome adversaries. Massive cannons, planetary defenses, weapons of such destructive power they had been kept secret even from most of the Council, were unleashed upon humanity's fleet. But each one was met with the same cold, methodical response. Humanity's ships evaded with precision, countered with weapons of their own that dismantled even these ultimate defenses. It was as if humanity had prepared for every contingency, anticipated every desperate measure. The broadcasts coming back from the battlefield grew quieter as the Empire's forces dwindled, the last ships barely holding their formations, commanders stunned into silence. Those who still fought did so with the dull acceptance of the inevitable, the realization that they were facing not just a military force but an intent that was unbreakable, a will that would stop at nothing short of total annihilation. Across the command center, the counselors and high-ranking officials exchanged helpless glances, their arrogance now replaced by the bitter taste of fear. For the first time, they felt the crushing weight of their own vulnerability, the realization that their empire, with all its history, power, and dominion, could crumble in the face of a single, unstoppable force. And still, the human fleet advanced, unyielding, precise, moving ever closer to the Empire's core. The Empire's capital, once a symbol of unshakable power and authority, stood in stunned silence as humanity's fleet breached its final defenses. The vast halls of the Imperial Council, which had resounded with the voices of leaders confident in their dominion, were now filled with an eerie quiet, broken only by the flicker of distress signals and desperate transmissions from the few remaining outposts. Every defensive line had fallen, every contingency plan shattered. The entire Empire was at the mercy of a force they'd once dismissed as insignificant. On the Council screens, the human fleet filled the viewports, their ships positioned with unbreakable precision, encircling the Empire's heart. Humanity's approach had been cold, methodical, and complete, a relentless march that hadn't paused for negotiation or mercy. It was now clear that this wasn't a show of force meant to frighten the Empire into submission, it was a definitive end. Humanity had come to bring down the full weight of every grievance, every underestimation, and every insult the Empire had ever cast in their direction. The last remaining members of the Council watched in horror as humanity's ships began their final approach. They'd run out of options, their plans and strategies reduced to ashes. The counselors who had once scoffed at the idea of humanity as a threat now sat with expressions of hollow resignation. They had once believed themselves untouchable, certain that their control over the galaxy was absolute, that no power could ever challenge them. The transmission lines fell silent as the first wave of humanity's final assault began. Energy beams, missiles, and high-powered munitions tore through the Empire's defenses with brutal efficiency, dismantling what little was left of the once formidable armada that had guarded the capital. Shields failed within seconds, defenses that were meant to withstand the mightiest of adversaries crumbled as if they were nothing. Humanity's fleet moved through it all, a tide of unstoppable force that showed no signs of slowing. Across the capital, buildings trembled as the shockwaves from humanity's onslaught reached the surface. Those who had once looked to the Council for guidance and protection now watched in helpless terror as the empire they trusted to keep them safe was brought to its knees. People crowded the streets, looking to the skies, searching for any sign that their leaders might offer them salvation. But none came. The Council, hidden away in their chambers, had no reassurances left to give, no last line of defense to call upon. In those final moments, the Councilors' thoughts turned inward, each realizing the arrogance that had led them here. They had scoffed at humanity, mocked their resilience, treated them as inferior beings with no place in their empire. And yet it was humanity's unwavering resolve that had undone them. They had underestimated the strength of a species driven not by power or dominance, but by a relentless will, a desire to survive and thrive on their own terms, without the interference of empires and councils. Humanity's fleet continued its unrelenting advance, every strike calculated, every movement purposeful. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no indication that they would leave anything standing. For humanity, this was not an act of conquest, it was a message, a reckoning for the years of dismissal, the years of being seen as lesser. And that message was clear: the era of the Empire was over. The Imperial Council chamber shook as the bombardment intensified, and the screens that had once displayed the Empire's dominion now flickered with images of destruction, fire consuming the last remnants of their fleets and defenses. In their final moments, the Councilors could only watch as their world, their empire, was dismantled piece by piece. The invincible power they had wielded was now a memory, reduced to rubble under the relentless assault of those they had once thought powerless. As the capital burned and the last defenses fell, humanity's fleet maintained its steady, unbroken formation, leaving nothing in its wake but silence and ruin. The empire that had once ruled with iron authority had met a force it could not bend, and that force had come not to bargain, not to intimidate, but to erase. And as the last structures crumbled, the once mighty empire's reign ended, its legacy swept away, leaving the galaxy forever changed in the wake of humanity's unyielding march.